Have you ever felt like God gave you a dream, only for your life to fall apart? You prayed, you trusted Him, you believed He had a purpose, but instead of open doors, you found disappointment. Instead of answers, there was silence. If you've ever wondered, God, where are you? Then Joseph's story is for you, because sometimes God is doing His greatest work when you can see the least. Joseph wasn't an ordinary young man. The Bible tells us that God gave him extraordinary dreams. In those dreams, Joseph saw something almost impossible. One day, his family would bow before him, not because Joseph wanted power, but because God was revealing part of His plan. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? To receive a promise directly from God, to believe your future was filled with hope. Joseph probably thought his life was about to become better. Instead, everything became worse. His own brothers became jealous. Every time they looked at him, their anger grew, until one day, they made a decision that would change Joseph's life forever. They threw him into an empty pit. Imagine the fear, the confusion, the heartbreak. How could this happen? Hadn't God just given him a promise? How could a promise from God lead to a pit? And that's the question many of us ask today. God, if you really have a plan for my life, why does everything feel like it's falling apart? Maybe you've prayed for healing, and you're still waiting. Maybe you've prayed for restoration, but nothing has changed. Maybe you believed God opened a door, only to watch it close again. Joseph didn't have those answers either. All he had was a promise. And sometimes, a promise is all we have to hold on to. But here's something Joseph couldn't see from the bottom of that pit. The pit was never the end of his story. In fact, God was already preparing everything that would one day fulfill the very dream Joseph thought he had lost. Part 2. From the pit to the prison. Joseph expected someone to come back. Maybe one of his brothers would change his mind. Maybe his father would come looking for him. But no one came. The sun slowly moved across the sky, and Joseph remained alone. Then he heard voices again. For one brief moment, he must have felt hope. Maybe they're coming back. But they weren't. A caravan of merchants passed by. His brothers pulled him out of the pit, not to rescue him, but to sell him for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph was treated like property. Imagine that moment. The brothers he grew up with, the people he trusted, looked into his eyes and handed him over to strangers. The chains around his wrists were heavy, but the betrayal inside his heart was even heavier. As the caravan disappeared into the distance, Joseph watched his home fade away. Everything familiar was gone. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know if he would ever see his father again. He didn't know why God had allowed this to happen. But even there, God had not abandoned him. In Egypt, Joseph was sold once again, this time to a powerful man named Potiphar. Most people would have given up. Most people would have become bitter. But Joseph chose something different. Even as a servant, he worked faithfully. He honored God in the small things. Day after day, God blessed everything Joseph touched. Before long, Potiphar trusted him with his entire household. It finally seemed like life was getting better. Maybe this was the beginning of God's promise after all. But Joseph had no idea that another heartbreaking test was just around the corner. Part 3. Faithfulness in the fire. For a while, life seemed peaceful again. Joseph had earned Potiphar's trust. Everything he touched prospered. The household flourished. The servants respected him. And for the first time in years, it felt as though the nightmare was finally over. Maybe this was the beginning of God's promise. But then, everything changed once again. Potiphar's wife began watching Joseph. Day after day, she tried to tempt him. Again and again, Joseph faced a choice. He could satisfy his own desires or remain faithful to God. No one else would have known. No one else would have seen. But Joseph knew God was watching, so he refused. He answered, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" One day, when they were alone in the house, she grabbed his robe. Joseph didn't stop. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He ran, leaving his robe behind. He escaped. But his obedience came with a cost. Humiliated and angry, Potiphar's wife lied. She accused Joseph of attacking her. Within moments, the trusted servant became a criminal. Potiphar believed the accusation. Joseph wasn't rewarded for doing what was right. He was thrown into prison. Once again, the dream seemed farther away than ever. If Joseph had looked only at his circumstances, he might have believed God had forgotten him. But heaven was still writing the story, and even inside a prison cell, God's plan had never stopped moving. Part 4, Forgotten by Men. Remembered by God, the prison walls were cold. The days became weeks, the weeks became months, and still, Joseph remained behind bars. He had done nothing wrong, yet he continued to serve faithfully. Even inside the prison, God's favor remained with him. Before long, the prison keeper noticed something different. Joseph was trustworthy, wise, faithful. Soon, he was placed in charge of the other prisoners. Then one night, 2 new prisoners arrived. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and his chief baker. Both men had disturbing dreams. Dreams they could not understand. The next morning, Joseph noticed the sadness on their faces. Instead of ignoring them, he asked, "Why do you look so troubled today?" They answered, "We both had dreams, but no one can explain them." Joseph replied, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." God gave Joseph the understanding. The cupbearer would be restored. The baker would be executed. 3 days later, everything happened exactly as Joseph had said. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph made one simple request. "When you stand before Pharaoh, please remember me," the cupbearer promised. Then he walked away. Back into freedom, Joseph waited. 1 day, 2 days, weeks, months, but the cupbearer forgot. Once again, Joseph was left alone, or so it seemed. Part 5. God turned it all for good. 2 full years passed. Joseph remained in prison, forgotten by the cupbearer, but never forgotten by God. Then one night, Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. He called every wise man in Egypt, every magician, every advisor, but no one could explain them. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembered, "I know a man. When I was in prison, there was a Hebrew who interpreted my dream." Immediately, Pharaoh sent for Joseph. After years in prison, the doors finally opened. Joseph stood before the most powerful ruler in Egypt. But he said, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer." God revealed the meaning: 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to prepare. Pharaoh saw God's wisdom in him. That very day, Joseph was clothed in royal robes. The prisoner became the governor of Egypt, exactly as God had promised years before. The years passed. The harvests were gathered. Then the famine came. Not only Egypt suffered, the surrounding nations did too. Far away, Joseph's own brothers became desperate for food. So they traveled to Egypt, and without realizing it, they bowed before the very brother they had once thrown into a pit. The dream God had given Joseph as a young boy had finally come true. Joseph recognized them immediately, but they did not recognize him. Instead of taking revenge, Joseph tested their hearts. Would they still be the same men who had betrayed him? When Joseph saw their repentance, he could no longer hold back his tears. He sent everyone else out of the room. Then he cried, "I am Joseph, your brother." His brothers were terrified. They expected punishment, but Joseph said, "Do not be afraid. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to save many lives." Instead of revenge, Joseph chose forgiveness. Instead of bitterness, he chose grace. He embraced his brothers. He welcomed his father Jacob to Egypt, and the family that had once been torn apart was restored. Joseph's story reminds us that God never wastes our pain. The pit was not the end. The prison was not the end. Even the betrayal was not the end. Because when God is writing your story, He can turn what others meant for evil into something beautiful.